Question time. And what was really interesting wasn't what the panel said. I mean, the truth is, it rarely is. It's what the public have to say, as we know only too well here at LBC. But there were 4 members of that audience during the course of that recording who said they wanted somebody to give this country clear and strong leadership. And that came from Leavers and from Remainers. Just please, Prime Minister, tell us exactly how we're going and how we're going to get there. Now, the day after that, of course, it was Mrs May's speech. Her 3rd major speech on the European Union. It started off, of course, in January last year with Lancaster House. It was followed up with the Florence speech. And now this. And it's interesting, during that speech, she mentioned the word clear 12 times. It is clear. And I'm asking you, do you think Mrs May's speech has made things clearer? You know, are you clear what her Brexit plan is? Well, this morning, she was doing a debrief of that speech with Andrew Marr. Let's listen to her.
Yes, what I was doing in this speech was setting out an ambitious vision of the future economic partnership that we want the UK to have with the European Union once we've left. And it was a vision that was ambitious, but it was also practically based and therefore a credible vision. It goes beyond anything that the European Union has done before in free trade agreements, because it's very broad. So it was covering issues like industrial goods, like cars, but also financial services, energy, transport, law, science, agriculture, fisheries. So it was setting out that ambitious vision, but also speaking to people here in the UK and saying...
Quite bluntly. You were quite blunt.
Well, I was being straight with people. I think it's important to be straight with people. But there's also one of the messages behind the speech, I think, was to say to people, as I think most members of the public feel, that the time for arguing, you know, either side of the referendum has gone. Actually, this was about setting out an ambition for our future, and also saying to the European Union and the 27 and also the European Commission, we've set out what we want, we've set out where we think we can have this ambitious relationship that's good for prosperity on both sides. Let's get on with it.
And now it's crunch time. And in the course of the speech, I thought you buried a couple of the sort of famous sayings that have dogged the Brexit talks. Liam Fox's terribly cheerful assertion this was going to be the easiest negotiation in human history. It's not been like that, has it?
Well, in one sense, we're doing a very simple thing. We're leaving the European Union. In another sense, of course, having been a member of the EU for over 40 years, there's a complexity to the relationship that we've developed. And what I was setting out in the speech today was showing how, in a very practical way, we can move forward on parts of those relationships. So, just for example, you know, if somebody's building cars here in the UK, they're probably using parts that have come from parts of the European Union,
go
selling
back and forth the whole time.
And selling. And I was saying we recognise that because we recognise the importance of people's jobs. What I set out today was a way we can continue to trade that ensures we maintain those jobs.
So there you have it. And goodness me, she has got some work to do, you know, because a YouGov poll that was put out the day before the speech showed a 12-point drop in the proportion of people who think the Conservatives' policy on Brexit is clear. So actually, out there in the country, there is a collapse of confidence in terms of knowing exactly where this government wants to take us. And you know, the number of people who now feel optimistic about the way Brexit's going. And bear in mind, we're coming up for the anniversary of the triggering of Article 50. Just 8% of voters feel more optimistic about Brexit than compared to a year ago, with 3 or 4 times that number feeling less optimistic. So no one doubts that she's got a very difficult job. No one doubts she's got a cabinet that is split down the middle. She's got on the backbenches people like Ken Clarke, who I was with on Thursday evening. Always good value, Ken, and you know, fun to be with, but he's making it pretty clear he'll go against the government whatever they try to do. There's Anna Soubry out there and others, so the parliamentary numbers are tight. It's tough for her. And in this speech, she did set out in terms of how a trade deal could be put together, perhaps more detail than we've seen before. The trouble with putting out technical detail is very few people understand it, including virtually everybody sitting in Parliament itself. For me, the real problem with that speech on Thursday is that she needed to stand up and say, we will not be bullied and talked down to by Barnier or Juncker or any of them. We will not have threats of punishment clauses. We will not let this lie. And I feel she needs to be a lot more assertive with these people because, they are playing for the future survival of the European Union. They're prepared to do anything. And the other thing that really worried me was during the referendum in the last couple of weeks, I was often asked, well, what if economic logic doesn't prevail? They sell us £80 billion worth of goods every year more than we sell them. But what if economic logic doesn't prevail and they try and put forward a deal that frankly is too expensive and unacceptable? And I said no deal is better than a bad deal. And I really believed that and I really meant that. And it was interesting that was language that the Prime Minister picked up. And the point is, folks, if you go into any negotiation, whether it's in business or politics or in life, you have to have a big stick with you. And you have to be able to say, look, if this goes wrong, we are walking away. It's the only possible way that the European Commission will take you seriously. And yet in this speech, she said, we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So it sounds to me like no deal is better than a bad deal ceases to be our negotiating position, and I think that puts us in a very much worse place. The country is crying out for clear, decisive leadership. I have no doubt that she is trying sincerely to do her best. I just do not think, frankly, she's up to this job. That's my view. Tell me what you think. Maybe you disagree with that fundamentally. Maybe you think, no, it's crystal clear. We know exactly where we're going with this, and in which case you can call me on 0345 6060 973, or maybe you think it's clear as mud, in which case text to 84850, and maybe you agree with me on this point about a lack of leadership, in which case you can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. I'm going to go to Morris on Edgware as my first caller of the morning. Good morning, Morris.
Good morning, Nigel. Now, at this moment in time, the things aren't very clear because not everything's been put on the table to the general public in the same way that you, as a pioneer of what became known as Brexit, you as a pioneer, you and your immediate followers, did you actually publish exactly, because you are an MEP and therefore know all the rules and regulations that are involved in the EU, did you actually publish a whole long list of all the various things that needed to be done so that we get cleanly out of the EU?
Well, Morris,
did you or didn't you?
Not a full negotiating package, because you can't go into a negotiation revealing all of your hands. But a few key demands, Morris, like taking back our territorial fishing waters. A few key demands like not under any circumstances going on paying into the EU budget, and a really clear demand that we had to get this done and dusted quickly, and that the 2 years, Morris, for Article 50, that had to be the maximum. So what really frustrates me now is not only are we almost halfway through the Article 50 period, but we've now got a Prime Minister looking for a transition period, or she's rebranded it, an implementation period lasting perhaps another couple of years. So Morris, I would say to you that on the big stuff, on the really big stuff, I would sum this up, that since the referendum, we've seen too much dither and delay.
Yeah, but the thing is this, you keep on, like many other newspapers and everybody else goes on about leadership and leadership and leadership. A leader has to have people who are prepared to follow properly and not... they need support.
Yep. Well, Morris, I tell you what...
So even a dictator needs support, because if everyone turned around and said to the leader, "Oh, push off," where would that leader be?
Morris, when she gave that speech...
What sort of advice are these people giving?
Well, goodness knows. When she spoke at that Lancaster House speech, Morris, in January last year, I praised her to the rooftops. She talked about global opportunities. She talked about breaking free. She talked about taking control, of our laws, our courts, our parliament. She said all the right things. And ever since then... Morris, what I've seen are mixed messages, particularly in Florence. We're leaving, but actually we want to rejoin a whole host of European Union agencies. Morris, I'm not sure that she really believes in Brexit.
Well, I think, Nigel, where are all the lawyers involved with all this? Where are all the business people? Where are they involved in all this?
Well, I wish they were involved a lot more, Maurice. I wish we had. Maurice, frankly, I would have had armies of British businessmen and women going around Europe, speaking directly to companies that they trade with and companies that sell a lot of goods into this country, and urging them to put pressure on their governments and onto the European Commission to get a proper deal. I think...
Let them get off their backside and do it.
Well, they need to have... Maurice, they need to have some leadership. And if we had leadership, and if we had a Prime Minister or a Brexit Secretary, it wouldn't matter, calling in business groups and saying, go out, be our ambassadors across Europe, I think we'd be in a much stronger position, Maurice, if we'd done that. Instead, the Prime Minister has relied on the civil service. And just look at them. You know, all these people that Liam Fox was given, that David Davis was given, turn out to be fanatical Remainers. So, Maurice, I would say too much emphasis on process, normality, the civil service, and too little of the entrepreneurs who will shape the future of our country post-Brexit. Maurice, I thank you for your call. And Maurice there, frustrated. And I think a lot of people are like Maurice, they're frustrated. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Is Mrs May's Brexit vision clear? She used the word more than a dozen times in her speech. I'm not so sure that it is. I'm not so sure we're getting quite the leadership that we need. Sean says to me on Facebook, a good deal for Britain will never be on the table as the EU don't want other countries to leave. Well, yeah, I rather agree with that. Anna says, Nigel, why don't you make some clear propositions? Well, I thought I had. But interestingly, in the second hour today, from 11 o'clock, we will talk about European politics. It's the Italian general election today. We'll also talk about what's been happening in Germany over the course of the last few months. A new coalition has been formed. Interestingly, part of that coalition agreement is a commitment from the new government of Germany to introduce a financial transaction tax. And that means on any trade done, within financial markets, a 1% tax would be surcharged. That would literally devastate liquidity in many of the money markets, in many of the commodity markets, and yet the German government and this has been talked about for years, but the German government are about to give this a new lease of life. I wonder what would happen if during the so-called implementation period the Germans managed to get a majority to push on for a financial transaction tax. Is this a threat to the City of London? No, it's an opportunity. Because what it says is that Europe is determined to go ahead with this piece of legislation. And once we're outside of all of this, we will have a great competitive advantage. And I've had enough of this ludicrous argument that says that all rules and all laws should be the same between European countries. No, they shouldn't. Over 80% of the UK economy are transactions that take place within this country and have nothing to do with trade with Europe or the rest of the world. And yet, as members of a single market, all 80% of our domestic economy is bound by European laws, and it's time we had a bit more vision and we broke free of it and tried to maximise the possibilities that Brexit gives us. Annabelle is calling from Twickenham. Good morning, Annabelle.
Oh, hello, Nigel.
So, did Mrs May set out her stall in such a way that you feel that you know exactly where we're going?
No, I didn't. I thought that she was weak, and I think that she should have said that she was prepared to walk, because then that would have given a clear signal to the European Union that she meant business. Only she doesn't, unfortunately, and it seems obvious. She's a technocrat. She's not a prime minister. As somebody said on one of the BBC programmes yesterday, they said that she was a middle manager. She wasn't a leader. I think the whole country knows of that, and that was a foreign correspondent that said that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit cruel, Annabelle, to say these things about the Prime Minister, but I have to say I do rather agree with you.
Well, this wasn't what I said. That was what a Chinese person said.
I think there is a very a very technocratic approach to it. It's perfectly clear that the civil service have a very, very strong hand in this.
Not only that, but I've said it before on many an occasion, you know whose fault it really is, and I think that he's got too much of it, and that is Gavin Barwell. And if you're listening, Mr. Barwell, keep out of it and stop influencing her.
Well, whether it's Gavin Barwell, Annabelle, or whether it's, Sir Humphrey, and there are lots of Sir Humphreys, and they all seem to be fanatically pro-EU. Annabelle, I think you're right. Before, she did say no deal is better than a bad deal. I'm thinking, great. That shows we're at the table. Don't mess with us. Mr. Barnier or any of you. And then what she said in this speech on Friday, Annabelle, was, we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So we're not walking away, whatever the circumstances. And that, I think, sends a message to the European Union that we're soft. When the French have battles with the European Commission, they threaten to veto everything, to disrupt everything, and they generally get their way. And it seems to me that we're playing by Queensberry rules with a group of people who don't even know what that means. Annabelle, I thank you very much. Lenny says on text, I believe she was clearly negative. Well, she was not trying to be negative. I'm pleased Theresa May has reaffirmed her intention to the EU and the UK that we're leaving the single market and the customs union. Now we can concentrate on trade and the Irish border, says David. Well, one thing she did do, David, she did say we are not looking for passporting within the area of financial services. We'll be looking for a degree of equivalence. So that was at least, I think, a little bit clearer in that sector. And she did in many ways, through the technical issues of trade, put down on the table some practical ideas and some counters to Mr. Barnier. And that was a good thing, but it was very, very technical. But if you're not prepared to play really tough with these guys, I don't think you're going to get much out of it. We've got a caller from Jersey in the Channel Islands. Anthony, first-time caller to the show. Good morning.
Good morning, Miss Farage. It's a real honour to speak to a fellow patriot. I'd like to, if you give me a few moments, I voted in the 1975 referendum.
Yeah.
And can I just take you through to before and after the referendum? Now in January the 22nd, 1972, Prime Minister Heath signed up the United Kingdom into the common market without the consent of the British people.
Yes, he did.
He did. Calling it the common market was the biggest deception since the Nazis were led to believe the invasion of Europe, D-Day, 6th of June, 1944, would be Pas de Calais.
That was a very good deception, though, Anthony, wasn't it? So sometimes deceptions
of Normandy.
Sometimes deceptions can be useful, can't they?
Yeah. Now then, and so the misleading term "common market" was nothing more than a front for one country called Europe. Now, prior to the referendum, May 13th, 1975, inflation was 21%. May 16th, 1975, the pound sank on the foreign exchange to lose 25.2% of its 1971 value.
Anthony, listen, we were going through terrible economic turmoil back in the 1970s, and in some ways, perhaps that's why we did vote by 2-1 to stay part of the common market, because it was sold as economic salvation. But I agree with you. It was the most gigantic lie that has been told in peacetime to the British people. It was an absolute disgrace, and all three parties were willfully part of it. But if we fast forward, 45 years to where we are now, do you believe that Mrs. May is the right woman to lead us through Brexit? And did you get from her message the clarity that she sought to give you?
Well, as I say, if it comes to fruition, then yeah. But at the moment, I'm very doubtful because of the lies that were told in 1975. regarding, because apparently Harold Wilson, he got some concession, but never materialised.
Well, but, yeah, even he admitted that the concessions were limited, and when David Cameron...
He was supposed to go, he didn't get it, but...
No, and David Cameron tried the same trick on us, and we weren't going to be suckered twice. So where's it going to end, Anthony, in your view?
Pardon? Well, if going from past experience of politics, and I've been a Conservative, but it's the Conservatives that really sold us out in the past, and I can't see why that the common market was a good thing. Why we couldn't have just have a common market, trade with Europe. But as Winston Churchill did say, be in Europe, but not of Europe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's
what we have to have all these directives, and for them to tell us what we can do and what we can't do. And incidentally...
Well, that's why we voted Brexit, Anthony.
The fishing industry...
I know.
...has lost 100,000 jobs.
Yeah, I know. Anthony, you haven't got to convince me, and we've done fishing on this programme many times. Anthony, I thank you for your passion. I'm going to go to Neil in Canterbury, a first-time caller to the show. Good morning, Neil.
Good morning, Nigel. How are you?
I am fine. I don't think we're getting the clarity we deserve, though.
Right, so I'd like to widen the conversation. So I just want to make the point that you and I will never, never agree on Brexit, okay? I'm an invertebrate Remainer. I think you've played your hand brilliantly in the last 10 years. I think your position is despicable. So let's just put
despicable? That's a very strong word, isn't it? Neil, all I want is for us to be a self-governing nation. How is that despicable?
I don't think we'll end up in that position.
How is that despicable, Neil?
I think you and your colleagues in all parties have led us into a position where no Prime Minister could put out clarity, because I don't think clarity can ever be achieved.
Neil, listen, I can tell the passion from your side of the argument, but why is what I've done despicable?
Because I think you, not you personally alone, but you and your Brexiteer leadership during the referendum told bald-faced lies that were swallowed wholesale by members of the public. And I can just say that in a straw poll of 10 of my friends who voted to exit, all of them would now vote differently, because the reality of what they voted for is beginning to hit us. And they don't believe that self-government and self-actualisation in the way you describe it is ever realised.
So we're condemned to being run by unelected bureaucrats in perpetuity, are we?
But I don't actually agree that is the position. That's what I'm saying.
Well, they make our laws.
We have never really been impacted in a way that is wholly negative for the economy, for the well-being of this nation, by European law. There is no evidence of that. There is plenty of evidence about economic impact, there is plenty of evidence about workforce impact, and there is plenty of evidence about being alone in the world, that we are a small nation and we must live as that. So you and I are just never going to agree on that analysis. No. I accept that.
All right, well, let me ask you, Neil. Let me ask you, Neil. And we can disagree, and I'm despicable, apparently, for reasons I haven't quite yet.
Sorry, no, I said your position is despicable.
Right.
You as an individual, I specifically said,
I tell you what.
Really well.
No, fine. Well, if we've reached a state, Neil, where the desire to be a self-governing nation is despicable. I don't call the European Union's original ideas despicable, but I do think where they've crushed nation-state democracy now is. Neil, I thank you. Call again, because you're a very sporting caller. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Mrs May keeps using the word clear. She's making it clear as to what her Brexit position is, and yet the country doesn't seem to be getting it. Mind you, she's had a tough week, hasn't she? Just look at it. Sir John Major, Tony Blair, former Prime Ministers lining up to try and derail Brexit, and indeed, in many ways, to derail her. So it's not being made easy for her. But does the wider British public, are they crying out, as Lord Adonis demands, for a second referendum? Well, more of that in a moment. But back to my basic question, are you clear what Mrs May's plan for Brexit is? Mark is calling from Huntingdon. He's a first-time caller to the show. Good morning, Mark.
Good morning, Nigel. And unlike Neil, I'm actually a fan of yours, a huge fan.
So you don't think I'm too despicable, then?
No, you're okay.
So, Mark, and if you're a supporter of mine, you will have supported the call for the referendum. We got the referendum. We won the referendum. But here we are. Nearly halfway through the Article 50 process, and I know it's not easy for the Prime Minister, but is she giving us the leadership and clarity that we need and deserve?
I'll do a last answer to that first. That's basically, I don't think it's going to make any difference who the leader is.
Right.
Because basically, if Parliament get the final say, that's a bit like holding a second referendum and only letting London and Scotland vote.
Well, I do understand what you mean, because the political class on this are pretty distant, aren't they, from the Brexit view in Huntingdon?
Yeah. Well, I mean, before Brexit, I always used to vote Conservative.
Mm.
And my local MP, Jonathan D'Ongley, I'll never vote for him again.
Because?
Because he's with Anne Filbury.
Yep.
You know, I just couldn't do it. You know, the referendum, it was all about what the people wanted. Not what big business wanted, not what the politicians wanted, it's what we wanted.
Not what John Major wanted, not what Tony Blair wanted.
No, it's what we wanted.
Yep.
Right? I mean, in Mrs May's speech, she said we're going to leave the single market.
Mm-hmm.
She said we'll leave the customs union.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to control our borders.
Mm-hmm.
Legal system, it's all coming back to us.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big ones on me.
And that all sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That all sounds good unless we leave the single market but finish up so closely tied in terms of regulation and everything else that we've only left it in name.
Yeah, well, that's no good. I mean, I can understand, it's like, you know, with their Henry Hoovers, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but they change a thing, you can't have as much power. Well, what's stopping us making Henry Hoovers for the European market and Henry Hoovers for our market if we want more power?
Well, actually, you know, whatever we manufacture, we have to conform with the standards in that country. So if we manufacture goods and sell them to America, we have to conform to their standards, and the same with Europe. But, I mean, you know, my big argument, Mark, is 80% of the UK economy, you know, most of those businesses in Huntingdon are not involved with import-export whatsoever. 80% of our economy is domestic, and Brexit is a chance to actually help the 5.2 million men and women out there that are running small businesses or acting as sole traders. And if we don't change any of the rules and regulations, we won't have helped them. So, Mark, you're pessimistic. You think ultimately Parliament's going to vote this deal down, do you?
Oh, yeah. There's no question about it.
And is that... And what would that mean? I mean, would that mean...
It means it won't be out. It'll mean that the politicians will do what they want and not listen to what the people...
Mark, if they try and stop Brexit from happening, don't underestimate the anger that you will see in this country.
Well, so I'm worried that there might be a civil war if they do something like that.
Well, I wouldn't put it as far as that, but there is certainly great anger out there. I guess, Mark, what would happen if Parliament did this to us is they would try and force us to vote again. And I do not want that to happen, but that is the worst-case scenario with this.
Well, that's what they always keep trying to do. You look what happened to Holland and that. No, we don't like it, we'll do it again.
Well, they did it in Denmark, they did it in Ireland, and with other referendums, they've simply ignored the result. Mark, they can't ignore us. The worst they can do to us is make us do that vote again. And if we have to do it again, we'll beat them, Mark, next time by an even bigger margin. Thank you. And Mark, they're clearly pretty unimpressed, not just with Theresa May, but with our entire political class. The only thing clear about Mrs May's speech is that she's not committed to a full Brexit, no clear vision on immigration or fisheries, and still wanting to keep us tied to some EU agencies. Helen, I agree with you. The problem I have with listening to Mrs May is that as soon as I hear her speak, I want to switch off. I am not clear at all what she is saying, says Andrew in Chelmsford. And Dominic says, I usually disagree with everything at Nigel_Farage says, but on the lack of clarity from the government on Brexit, I hate to say I agree with him. Mrs May says she's clear on Brexit, but she hasn't got a clue. I think Mrs May is treating the negotiation like a poker game, and she'll only reveal her hand at the right time. And she's showed enough for now, says Chris. Well, Chris, that's an optimistic estimate of our negotiating stance. I've watched the Foreign Office. I've watched, you know, our civil service in combat with the European Union over the years, in particular during that 6-month period when Tony Blair himself held the rotating presidency of the European Union, when he promised to reform the CAP, to reinvigorate the European economy and to do most extraordinary things. And then I saw a haggard Mr Blair a couple of days before Christmas at the end of that 6 months coming into that committee room, clearly having barely slept all night and having been absolutely stuffed by the French. He'd lost game, set and match. He'd given away £7 billion of our rebate in return for nothing. Our track record, Chris, on this sort of thing isn't really very good. Simon is calling from Harwich. Good morning, Simon.
Good morning, sir. I've been a caller before.
Yes, I recognise you.
I'm a trade unionist, as I've said before. I'm a Labour councillor who did vote Leave. Basically, I don't think Mrs May has a clue what's going on half the time. Because of the fact, I feel
Simon, it sounds a bit like Jacob Rees-Mogg's household, with lots of kids running around in the background.
Yeah, I have 3 children, but but that's part of the reason why I voted out, because I wanted a better future for them.
Yep.
I truly believe that, but I still stand by that. But what I am upset about is the lack of leadership. It feels like, why can't we say, if we've not got a good enough deal, we will walk away?
Absolutely.
Why can't we say that? Are we scared?
Well, she did, worried? But Simon, she did say it last year, and now, and I'm going to quote it again, for the avoidance of any doubt, now on Friday she says, we will not be buffeted by demands to threaten a walkout. So it means she's going to stay whatever they do to us, and however they treat us.
That's not right. You can't do that. I mean, we didn't even accept that in the Labour Party, let alone the Conservative Party. I mean, as you know, I'd be a Eurosceptic as well from the left point of view. But
well, plenty are, Simon. Plenty are, Simon. I mean, at least 4 million people who voted Labour in that general election last year had voted Brexit the year before. But Simon, not that it's on topic, but given you're a Labour councillor and a trade unionist, I can't resist asking you, how do you feel about the Labour Party completely turning around on its manifesto and now saying they want us to be in a customs union and perhaps a single market?
Well, it's hard. I mean, as you know, I am a Labour person. I won't argue, but my personal view, I think we should come out. If we're paying for a service, it's like we're all in name, and that feels wrong.
Are you going to tell Mr Corbyn, Simon, what you think?
I could tell him. I could send him an email. He's willing to accept emails, but I am just one person, Nigel.
No, I know, but I do think, Simon, I do think a lot of Labour voters have been pretty badly betrayed by Mr Corbyn. At least Theresa May keeps the language that we're going to leave the single market, the customs union, and take back control of things, even if the compromises she's prepared to make to get us there would nullify much of the positive benefit. But the Labour Party, Simon, deserve a roasting over their U-turn. Simon, I thank you for your call, and that's the left wing centre-left perspective on Brexit, and there's a lot more people like Simon out there than much of our press give credit for. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. So a big speech from Theresa May, but of course a few days before that, a big speech from Jeremy Corbyn. Quite a big change in the Labour Party's position. I wonder, what do the public make of our party leaders? We've had a couple of calls this morning saying that our faith in the political class is plummeting towards the floor. Well, have a listen to this. Comres polling, very, very interesting. Considering the last week and the speeches they've made on Brexit, has your opinion of the following leaders got better, worse, or stayed the same? Jeremy Corbyn, 18% think better of him. 45% have kept their view the same. 29% think worse of him, and the rest don't knows. Theresa May, 9% say they have a better opinion of her after her speech on Friday. 52% stayed the same, and 27% have a worse opinion of her. So basically, we've got support for what our leaders are saying on Brexit in these speeches. Support for them and the rest of the political class is plummeting. And that perhaps explains why. In that audience in Blackpool, when I was there doing question time on Thursday, there were so many people, Leavers and Remainers, crying out for absolutely decisive leadership. And one thing I would really love to see is just publicly Theresa May saying to Barnier, we will not be bullied by you, you jumped up little bureaucrat. That's what I'd like to hear, but there we go. I doubt I will. Barbara is calling from Chichester. Good morning, Barbara.
Oh, good morning, Nigel. Yes, clear as mud.
Clear as mud. Barbara, there was lots of detail here about how she saw trade working, but it's kind of the big stuff she's not quite getting, isn't it?
That's right. And I've always considered myself to be fairly intelligent, but I thought, goodness, this is not a speech for ordinary people.
No.
because it was, I don't know whether it was deliberately done that way or whether that's just the way she is. That's how she speaks. But I think she's a puppet, to be honest, without being too blunt.
Of whom, Barbara? I mean, who is the James Bond film character stroking the white cat, controlling all of this?
I'm not sure. I think there are one or two. Somebody mentioned Gavin Barwell earlier, and I've always felt that myself about why did Gavin Barwell get back in there after the election?
Well, the reason for that, of course, is her previous advisors were sacked, weren't they?
Yes, but why him? I mean, surely she could have got somebody. Anyway, that's another
Yeah, I mean, she'd even given Lord Adonis a job for the government.
Right.
You know, before he walked away. What she's doing, Barbara? What she's doing, Barbara? She appoints a mixture of Leavers and Remainers, believing by doing this you can keep the whole thing together. Actually, I think what she should do.
Not strong enough.
What she should do is sack all the Leavers. Or sack all the Remainers, and then we'd know where we were, wouldn't we?
Exactly, one or the other. Because to me, certainty, straightforwardness is always better, even if it's not what you like.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think the country is crying out for it, including you, Barbara, from Chichester.
With convictions, you've got to have the courage of your convictions. You've got to have those convictions in the first place.
And I don't think she's really got them, do you? No. Thank you, Barbara. Great call. Thank you. I get on Twitter, why are you so scared of voting again? Do we live in an authoritarian state, or is democracy still respected? Thank you, Andrew. Well, interesting, isn't it, that when people were asked, given Corbyn's U-turn, when people were asked in a poll, should Corbyn have committed Labour to a second Brexit referendum, a staggering 12% say yes. So, you know, there is not demand out there for a second referendum amongst the public. At least I don't believe there is. There is from, of course, Tony Blair and John Major and no doubt Goldman Sachs and many others. But most people say, a clear majority say, we have had this vote, let's get on with it. And Mrs May had picked that up, and I suspect her market research had picked that up, hence her saying, let's get on with it. And if you took some of the things she said at face value, you'd think, great. But, you know, we're dealing with bully boys, and if we're not prepared to walk away, they will walk all over us. Sam is a first-time caller from Perth in Western Australia. Good morning.
Good evening to you, Nigel. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very well indeed, thank you. You're obviously following the Brexit debate from the other side of the world. Has she shown, I mean, give us a global view, has she shown strong, decisive leadership?
Well, as an Australian and someone who's just watched from afar, firstly, could I just say that the disrespect I've noticed from people, from Tony Blair to whomever else, to dishonour the referendum is nothing short of disgusting. I mean, we might as well all pack up and go home if people's democratic vote's not going to be permitted or allowed. But secondly, I've heard people on your show this morning speak and playing down Britain as some small little island.
Yeah, we had that, didn't we? Yeah.
And I'd just like to say I'm from a nation with less than half the population of England alone. And we somehow managed to be a first world democratic secular nation with free trade agreements with the likes of Japan and Korea and China. So I find it laughable, people speaking in Britain thinking that the great nation of England or the great region of the UK can't possibly fight on their own. I just find it farcical.
It's a lack of self-confidence, isn't it? It's a lack of belief in the nation's ability to do things. It's sort of a conditioning, Sam, I guess we've had, because we've been stuck for so long inside this European project, and we're used to hearing big businesses explaining we must be part of it. They love it, of course, because they can write their own rules. No, I mean, Sam, I do look at those people who are my fellow countrymen almost with disbelief, as you've pointed out beautifully. What is Australia now? About 20 million people, is it?
It's about 25, Nigel.
25, so yeah. And as you say...
You've mentioned many times, I've seen you mention along the journey in EU Parliament, particularly about our immigration system and our value system and how we run things, which has a little bit of pushback, as you can imagine, from a few lunatics on the left in Australia, but the majority of Australians understand that the reason we are a safe first world nation is because we are very stringent on our immigration, and we've seen disasters occur with people on boats, in particular coming from the north, which I notice is well and truly in vogue in the Mediterranean.
Oh, yes.
But just back on Theresa May, I find her cowardice awful, that she's not standing up to the likes of the EU.
The bully boys.
I've noticed you've carved through them quite successfully on your journey, like the Australian pace attack would carve through the England.
Oh, don't, not from that awful, terrible time we had at the Wacker. Oh, don't remind us, please, Sam.
Well, it's gone now, so you've got a new chance with a new stadium. But, I would just hope that you would get out there, and not to use another pun, and go into bat for England again, because while you're doing a tremendous job on this show, this needs to be seen through, and for it to be anything less than a proper Brexit, I think is really disappointing, because I know that 17 million or so people voted for that, and that's what should happen.
Yep. Sam, great call. Thank you very much for calling in. And Sam there, a regular listener from Western Australia. My last call on this subject is going to be from Basildon in Essex. David, another first-time caller to this show. Good morning.
Good morning, Nigel. Great last call.
It was a great call, wasn't it? Yeah, he made the point, didn't he? 25 million people, they're a first world nation. What's the problem?
Okay, very quickly, we want to trade with Europe. They need to trade with us. I voted Brexit. How would you negotiate the deal so that there aren't giant lorry parks at Calais and Dover?
Oh, smart technology, David, is the answer to that. But actually, if we had a tariff-free agreement, there'd be no problem at all. We'd carry on as we are. And that's what economic logic says should happen. But Barnier and co don't want to do it because they're worried if we walk away with a simple free trade deal, other countries are going to want to walk too.
Do you think we'll get it?
I don't think we're going to get a proper trade deal out of them. I hope I'm wrong, David. But as I say, unless we're prepared to say we'll walk away from this, we'll never get a good deal.
You just feel that the current politicians couldn't negotiate a discount off of a broken bag of crisps.
Oh, David, on that wonderful comment, we will leave this debate. I thank you very much. Now, today, Italians are heading to the polls to vote in one of the most uncertain elections in years, and one that could determine if Italy gets a populist, Eurosceptic coalition government. Also will report that German Chancellor Angela Merkel is set to form her fourth government after the opposition Social Democrats voted in favour of another grand coalition. Do you sense Euroscepticism is sweeping across Europe? Tell me I'm wrong. And is the idea of coalition politics perhaps the way forward? Call 0345 6060973, text to 84850, tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC, and watch us on Facebook. Comment there too. We're live from London next. This is International Hour. We're going to talk in this hour about Donald Trump and the European Union, two groups that absolutely loathe each other, and the beginnings, the prospects perhaps of some kind of trade war. We're going to talk about Mrs. Merkel, Germany, the fact that it's taken months and months and months to actually form a government, and we're going to talk about the Italian general election, which is taking place today. Is Euroscepticism now sweeping through Europe? I'll tell you what, it's certainly swept into the White House. I think Trump's administration are more Eurosceptic than I am, which perhaps explains what's been going on. But Italy, Italian politics. Now, I have, over these years, in the European Parliament, I've had the Northern League, who have now rebranded to the League, now a major force in Italian politics. I've had them in my group, and in 2014 I formed a new group in the European Parliament in a negotiation that took place between Beppe Grillo. And if you haven't heard of Beppe Grillo, he was Italy's best known, best paid stand-up comedian. And he formed a new party, the Five Star Party, a completely different concept in politics. The whole party is run and organised online. They select their candidates online. They choose their policies online. And I've sat with the Five Star movement ever since 2014. So a lot of these players in the Italian elections I know. I even know Silvio Berlusconi, because when I was first an MEP, he, believe it or not, did a stint there as an MEP. Italian politics is complicated. Italian politics is entertaining. Italian politics is full of arguments, the likes of which you've simply never, ever seen. I never forget, in 2009, when I was working with the Northern League, and two of their deputies came to see me in my office to talk about how we were going to form this new alliance in the European Parliament. And within about 30 seconds of the meeting beginning, they started screaming at each other, came very close to blows, left, went into the corridor, screamed some more, and the meeting was cancelled. And I thought, gosh, this is all rather bizarre. And one of their advisors said to me later, no, Nigel, it's fine. This is kind of how we do things in Italian politics. But let's try and get a big idea of who the players are in this election today. It is complicated, but earlier on I spoke to Dr. Filia Alum, and she's senior lecturer in politics and Italian from the University of Bath. And I wanted her to explain to us what these elections are about and what they mean. And I started by asking her, who are the main parties involved today?
So rather than main parties, there are really three kind of main coalitions. There's a centre-left coalition, which is led by Matteo Renzi, the former Prime Minister. Then there is a centre-right coalition, which is made up of various parties led by Silvio Berlusconi. And then there is a centre, well, I'm not sure we can call it a centre, but there is another group, so there's a three-way split, and the other group is led predominantly and is led by the Five Star Movement.
Now, the Five Star Movement have sort of come from nowhere. They've been led by this very charismatic comedian. But who's actually running Five Star these days?
So basically, the comedian Pepe Grillo can't actually stand for a public office himself. So it's being run and being led, or the challenge or the election is being led by a young man called Luigi Di Maio, who is a 31-year-old who's come from nowhere and who's got involved in politics over the last couple of years. So he's seen as a fresh, new face.
And the opinion polls, the last ones I saw at least, suggesting that Five Star will become the biggest party in Italian politics.
So one of the things we need to take into account is that in Italy, by law, polls are not allowed to be released 2 weeks before the actual election. So there are these 2 weeks where we don't really know what is going on. So you're absolutely right. The last polls seem to indicate that the Five Star Movement will be the largest single party. But that will not automatically mean that they will then go on to form the government because of this very complicated electoral system. And I think that's what we need to think about, is the complex nature of the new electoral system that was introduced in 2017, if I remember, which is extremely complicated, which means that even if the Five Star Movement is victorious this evening, is the largest single party, that does not mean that they're going to government, and that's when we will then have this post-election negotiation and engineering where our comeback kid, Silvio Berlusconi, might be able to have more power and might be able to organise what's going to happen next. He can't actually stand himself because he's banned and barred from public office, but he might have a role to play in what happens next.
No wonder people are confused. And yes, and I know that Antonio Tajani, the President of the European Parliament, has volunteered himself to become Prime Minister if that Berlusconi coalition wins. Interestingly, the Five Star Movement, and of course I know Beppe Grillo, I've worked with his people in the European Parliament, but Grillo's always said to me that he hardly has a voter over the age of 40, that it's a very, very young phenomenon in terms of their support. And yet, what do you think, I mean, is it immigration and the euro, are they the main issues in this election, or are people voting on corruption too?
Well, one of the things we haven't mentioned, potentially, is the 30% of people who might not vote.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a big kind of vote where there are a lot of people who might find that the electoral system might confuse their vote and might produce a government that they're not actually involved in or interested in. I'm not sure necessarily that the big issues have been spoken about correctly and intelligently. I think there's a lot of personality politics that has taken place and taken hold in Italy. So I'm not really sure that there have been that many clear manifestos to a certain degree. It has very much focused on the personalities. What you haven't mentioned is that Matteo Salvini has proposed himself as potentially a prime ministerial candidate if he and the Northern League make a massive breakthrough and beat Forza Italia in terms of a vote in terms of the single party. So that will be interesting to see. I think that the situation is going to be one of long protracted negotiations. It's not going to be very, very clear. I'm not sure that necessarily Europe has anything to worry about. I think that what happens in Italian politics is very much its own dynamics, its own history, and therefore I think that, there are a lot of issues, but unfortunately there haven't been really any kind of deep discussions and deep analysis of the situation in Italy. So people are voting not necessarily for a party, perhaps against a party, and the situation is extremely confused.
Yeah, I must admit, I thought a few months ago that a lot of the parties were making very Eurosceptic noises, and I've noticed as the election's gone on, we've seen rather less of that. So I guess you're right. Personality is dominating in many, many ways. And tell us, I mean, to people in this country, Silvio Berlusconi, and we might laugh or be appalled at the Bunga Bunga parties, but as you say, he's barred from public office because
although he's challenging that. He's actually challenging that, yes.
He is challenging it, but I mean, does this man still have credibility in Italy?
I'm not sure that necessarily he has credibility. I think the situation is extremely confused. I think that the left haven't necessarily done as much as they could have, and I think that the electorate is tired and is not sure where change is going to come from. So populism has taken hold, and he's charismatic, so that obviously helps and attracts certain voters. And again, I'll come back to the fact that we have this kind of poll. We don't know what's actually happened in the last 2 weeks, and we're not really clear, whether the apathy is going to take hold. What is going to be clear is that afterwards, if there isn't a majority, what happens in Italy, whether they go back to the election and they vote again. That is one thing that we need to realise, or who becomes Prime Minister. It seems to me that the real kind of interesting things will only happen after the election. The campaign has been one full of insults to a certain degree, has been one of simplifying important questions like immigration, like even the mafia, for example, that hasn't really been dealt with. And so I think it hasn't been a very interesting or good campaign, but what will be interesting from our perspective will be to see what happens afterwards, and who manages to hold together a government, if at all possible.
Well, that's a sort of quick run through Italian politics. It's complex, and of course, if you have a system of proportional representation, you will always have more parties vying for position, because, the thresholds to get seats are fairly achievable. I want to ask you, do you sense that Euroscepticism is sweeping across Europe? I think it certainly is. And is the idea of coalition politics perhaps the way forward? Would you like to see another coalition here in this country? To get involved in this, call me on 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And apart from watching us on Facebook, you can comment there too. What is for certain is that the Five Star Movement, a populist movement of young people, and bear this in mind, folks, of the under 40s, the Italians are the most disenchanted with the euro as their currency and with the European project because of what they see with mass migration coming to Italy's shores. So it's almost the other side of the coin from this country, where the majority of young people in this country voted Remain. A majority, it would appear, of youngsters in Italy, if they were given the chance, might go the other way. But the parties, Berlusconi clearly has a grudge against the European Union. He was effectively removed in a coup d'etat as Prime Minister and replaced by Mario Monti. An unelected Prime Minister was plonked into Italy, former Goldman Sachs director. I'm sure that's just a complete coincidence. So Berlusconi has got quite a Eurosceptic grudge against the project. Matteo Salvini, who leads the Lega. Now, they were called the Northern League for years because they wanted the north of Italy to separate away from the south. They're now called the Lega, and they're trying to get votes in the south as well. And Salvini, on the record in the past, saying he wants Italy to leave the European Union. But Europe itself, and we kind of got this, didn't we, really, out of that interview with Filia Alum, Europe itself has diminished, I think, over the last few weeks as a campaign issue, but Euroscepticism had propped up, I think, the League, Berlusconi, and indeed the Five Star. And how interesting that once again it is the centre-left Renzi, the former Prime Minister, the man who had to resign at the end of 2016 when he lost a referendum on constitutional change and reform. But it is the traditional socialist parties that are being squeezed in nearly all of these scenarios. Very much the same thing happening in Germany, where now the SPD are now third in the polls, with the AfD up above them. So I'm going to go to Richard in Sidcup. And by the way, I'm particularly keen to hear from any Italian listeners, you know, how you see this election going today, how you see Italian politics as a whole. Because even though we may not get a decisive result today in Italy, there is a shift towards what people call populism. I don't call it populism. I think that term was designed as an insult. But it is a different kind of politics. And there'll be a massive shift in Italy in that direction today. Of that, I'm absolutely sure. Let's go to Richard in Sidcup. Good morning, Richard.
Good morning, Nigel. I just wanted to put it to you. It seems to me it's not just Italy at the moment. There just seems to be the traditional divide of socialist versus capitalist politics has now been replaced by patriotic people versus people that are people in politics that are very pro-immigration. It just seems, obviously, this is happening and is spiking in Italy at the moment, but it's not just Italy. It seems that every country that's been subjected to EU immigration laws are now appearing to rebel against it. But
yes.
My second point being is that we've got a party in this country, the Labour Party, which are obviously pro-immigration. They've made no secret of it. If they got into power, it would be just unrelented immigration. But you only need somebody like Theresa May, that basically she's only got to sort of utter a few pretences about controlled immigration. We know full well when she was Home Secretary, immigration only ever went up, despite
oh yes,
that was made by her and David Cameron. So I don't know. Is there room here for further betrayal? I mean, even if we get everything we want from our Brexit negotiations, I still wouldn't trust Theresa May with immigration.
Well, Richard, they've shown no intention of doing, frankly, anything about immigration, and part of Barnier's paper that was put out the other day said that anyone that comes during the implementation/transition period will have full rights, and Mrs May did not counter that in her speech at all. This Conservative government have no intention whatsoever to do anything significant about immigration, and that will be seen, Richard, at some point in time as a further betrayal. Richard, your basic, and thank you for the call, Richard's basic point is that European politics is now splitting. Immigration is indeed the divisive issue, and either you are for nation state and you believe in controlling immigration very strongly, or you believe in bigger supranational structures, and I guess, to quote Mr Corbyn the other day, that we're all world citizens. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Well, some quite dramatic news from Italy today, not just the general election, but the Fiorentina captain, Davide Astori, has died aged 81. The top side confirmed the death of their central defender in a short statement on their official website. It said, "We're deeply upset to report that Captain David Astori has died of a sudden illness. For the terrible and delicate situation, and above all for the respect of his family, sensitivity is called for." So 31 years old, senior, big national player in Italy, being found dead overnight. And in this country, Sir Roger Bannister, if you remember, was the first man to break the 4-minute mile, and he's died overnight, aged 88, in Oxford, his family have announced this morning. I called for Italians living in this country or Italy to help join the debate, and I have been helped. Roberto, a first-time caller to the show from Reigate in Surrey, is on the line. Good morning, Roberto.
Ciao, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. How do you... So, Roberto, massive change in Italian politics. How do you see it?
Listen, I'm supporting the five-star movement, and the analysis is not very correct. The five-star movement is not a party. It's something against the establishment.
It's a movement, yeah.
Yes, it's a movement. It's not a party. We have got the worst politician in West Europe, and you know that because you were in Europe. We are fed up about this kind of people, okay? I'll give you an example. If you got a bucket of apple and it's full of worm, if you put a new apple, it will be eaten. The system itself is so corrupted that even a nice person, he cannot do anything. We need something completely different. It cannot be that a barber, you know barber, the one that cut the hair, inside the government is taking £12,000 a month net. He cannot keep going in this way. We cannot keep going that the head of Lombardia region or county, you say in England, is taking more than Donald Trump. Something has to change, and it must be very strong. And
well, Roberto,
movement is the only one.
Roberto, yes, they are the Five Star Movement. They are, of course, a registered political party, but they are in the feel of it, and in every way a movement, set up by Beppe Grillo and an internet genius called Gian Roberto Casaleggio. And I went to his office in Milano and met him some years ago. He's passed on now since, and his son David runs it. You're quite right. The Five Star Movement did start as an anti-corruption movement, but of course now they've got MEPs and MPs and mayorships in places like Rome. Some of the accusations, Roberto, that they've made against the established politicians are now beginning to be made about some of Five Star members themselves.
Nigel, listen, when you got a movement that is 8-9 million people, it cannot be all perfect, okay? Yeah. But you have got a perspective of an English guy with a decent policy, okay? Brexit. You think A, I think B. There is a discussion. We don't have any more left, right, or center. We have got a group of people that they want to steal, they want to work 3 years and having a pension for 25 years. It's a nightmare. Something completely new must happen.
Well, no. I mean, and Roberto, that's why they're probably going to come out as the biggest party today. And who knows if the Northern League, or now the League, given that they're trying to get votes in the South, if they exceed expectations, it may be possible that the Five Star and the Lega together could form a coalition. That is certainly not impossible. But Roberto, let me just ask you one last thing. I completely understand why the Five Star Movement came into being, with the problems of Italian politics and corruption and all the rest of it. How, as a supporter of the Five Star, are you one of those supporters pushing them for Italy to have a referendum on whether to stay in the euro?
Well, this is a big... I know that is something that you are very passionate.
No, forget me, because I meet their MEPs on a regular basis, and some of them are very, very Eurosceptic, others less so.
Yeah. No, me, I'm pro United States of Europe, that you don't like, but I feel sorry that England is out. I don't have any. It's not that I'm angry, nothing. But I think that a big block, if it could be managed properly, it can be good for us in a long term.
Roberto, I would say to you, Roberto, there's more chance of Italy being well governed than there is the United States of Europe working. Roberto, I thank you, and that was, in many ways, a very authentic voice of why the Five Star Movement got going in the first place. Absolute dislike and distrust of all things in Italian politics, and every one of the candidates that stands for that party will not have been in party politics of any kind before. It is an attempt at fresh start politics, and today they may well come top in the country. The biggest problem in Italy is squabbling politicians, or politicians that don't have Italy at their heart, I get. Italy, Germany, the UK, Holland show how much resentment out there is towards the EU. Yes, not in the case of Roberto, but many, many, many people who are voting Five Star, particularly the younger ones, think the euro has been a catastrophe for their country. And Bridget says, Nigel, listening to you from the beach in Fuerteventura, well, there are a lot of very, very jealous people there, Bridget. I'm going to go to Jeffrey in Wolverhampton, a first-time caller to this show. Is Euroscepticism, and as they call it, populism, Jeffrey, sweeping the continent?
Yes, I believe. Good morning, Nigel, by the way.
Good morning.
Yes, I believe that, it is totally. It's different over Europe than what it is in the UK, but I think for different circumstances. They have far more immigration and far more unemployment, and I think that's the deciding thing as to why the young people are getting more Eurosceptic than what they are in the UK.
Yes, I think, Jeffrey, had we joined the Euro, as Mr. Blair and others wanted us to do, and the CBI, of course, and all these people who tell us now leaving would be a disaster, Ken Clarke, of course, as well. Had we joined the Euro, I suspect the youth in this country would be very Eurosceptic, but mercifully we didn't. But no, I mean, this is... So, the real question, Jeffrey, is this. People like Tony Blair think that Brexit and what's happening on the continent is a short-term blip. They believe it's an outburst of anger, and that it will subside, and that normal service will be resumed. My view, Jeffrey, is that 2016 was an historic moment in the West. Brexit and Trump, I think, were just the beginning of an absolute sea change that is going to sweep through our politics. Which of those two do you subscribe to?
Oh, yeah, yes, definitely. I don't only think that it's like with Brexit and Trump. I mean, I voted Brexit, and I was a big believer in it, and still are. I think it's a combination of the new populist vote, which is finally people waking up to it, but it's also what we've seen from politicians over the years. The distrust has slowly built up. That can we believe anything politicians say to us?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, Jeffrey. Given those speeches that Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn have made in the last couple of weeks, their own personal ratings appear to be plummeting as well. So it's happening everywhere. Jeffrey, I thank you. What does Berlusconi's personal habits have to do with governing the country? When he became Prime Minister, Italy was doing fantastic business with the world. Just like Trump, there was a conspiracy of the left and the communists to topple the guy through any means. Well, trouble is, he can't stand as Prime Minister because of his conviction for fraud. He is appealing against that. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC. Italian general election taking place today, and a new kind of vote, a new kind of party doing very, very well. Meanwhile, finally, at long last, there is a government in Germany. Funny, isn't it? When we had a coalition government back in 2010, it took about 6 days to form the coalition. You'd think to read the British newspapers, we were about to fall off the edge of the world. And yet, Germany, Europe's most powerful country, has taken a very long time to get to this coalition. And to help us through this, I'm joined by Jürgen Kronig, political commentator and former editor of the German weekly paper Die Zeit. Good morning, Jürgen.
Good morning, Nigel.
So, they've managed to form a government.
Already?
Well, how long did it take?
Month and month and month. Yep. And I am puzzled because, to tell you the truth, I responded to the call from LBC out of sort of tradition and good cooperation, but I don't know if the SPD decision, the SPD members of the Social Democratic Party have to decide.
Well, they have. Well, we're told, news reports tell us they have decided. They voted in favour.
In favour, 60% or something.
Yes,
indeed. And this was this is ironic because it may be the death warrant of the Social Democratic Party. The party lost the more they went into a coalition government with Merkel. From 2000, just to give you an example, 2005, the last time when Chancellor Gerhard Schröder led the Red-Green coalition from Social Democrats with the Greens, he got 35.6%, lost against Merkel. Next election, they moved to the left, they lost approximately 10%. Now, at the last election, they just got 20%.
Yep.
This is a once proud party. Now, of course, opinion polls say they are down to 15 or 14%, even behind the new Alternative for Germany, AfD. So, this decision of the majority might mean the end of the Social Democratic Party as we know it, because the voters will punish this.
Yeah, I mean, Martin Schulz, who, of course, I knew, as he was, chairing the European Parliament, and off he went to head the SPD. And
he was not your most favourite.
Well, we had a few exchanges, and some of them you saw in public. There were others in private you didn't see, I can promise you.
Yeah,
so
I believe you.
We weren't exactly friends. But, I mean, he said, no, we're not going to do a deal, we're not going to form a grand coalition. Then he changed his mind, and then it cost him the leadership. Is it reasonable, Jürgen, to say that the rise of AfD, the rise of Euroscepticism in German politics, has completely upset the arithmetic?
Indeed it has, but it is the SPD, the Social Democratic Party, which kept together for a while, and Schröder was the last one who did it, keep together the traditional working class and the sort of public sector, social, teachers, university academics. These two pillars of the basis of the SPD have now gone. The working class voters, the traditional industrial workers, and what's left of this social group, have moved either to the AfD, because they are more Eurosceptic, they are against this political correctness, it remains, and the other, the social sector and teachers and academic and globalists, they are either with the Greens or they don't know where they are, or with the SPD. So this means the end of the traditional social democratic ability to gather a coalition.
No, fascinating. And finally, Jürgen Koenig, tell me, it was a decision on immigration that fatally undermined Mrs. Merkel's authority over the course of the last couple of years.
Indeed, yes, and I am on record of saying to Nick Ferrari on program in August or September 2015 that this opening of the borders by Merkel will most probably mean Brexit. And it led to it helped to Brexit.
It did. I have no doubt, actually, that Mrs. Merkel's decision did impact in the Brexit referendum.
Yes.
But can she, in your opinion, is she able now to regain her authority as leader?
I don't think so. She is a dead woman walking, to use a phrase which was used for Theresa May. Really, I mean, she can't, and I predict that she will be replaced in 2 years' time.
Interesting. Interesting. Jürgen Koenig, thank you very much for joining us there. That was Jürgen Koenig, political commentator, former editor of the German weekly paper Die Zeit, and he's saying German politics is in a complete mess. Merkel's got no authority and can't survive. The traditional SPD centre-left party is in, he thinks, possibly even terminal meltdown, and the Eurosceptics are on the march. So, the Italians are voting today. 3 very clear coalitions out there, but the one in the middle, the fascinating one, is indeed the Five Star Movement, a very new political party. That's looking like topping the polls. The thing to really watch for is how do the Lega do? Do they get enough votes, a big enough percentage and seats, that they and Five Star could, between them, form a coalition? It's unlikely, but it's not impossible. I asked for Italian callers. I'm getting them. David from Canterbury in Kent, good morning.
Hello, Nigel. How are you?
I'm very well. So are you voting today?
So, technically I could, but I couldn't find any party that really convinced me, so I'm not actually voting. Yeah.
David, I've seen pictures of the ballot papers in Italy. I mean, they're so big, you could almost cover a whole wall on the side of a house with them. Surely of all those dozens of parties, there must have been one you could have voted for.
Well, yeah, probably, but, the problem is, you just have 3 big coalitions, right? So that is the vote that really matters. So the other parties are more like, to put some symbols on the ballot, I would say.
Yeah, and okay, so you're not voting. What would you have wanted to hear from a party to have got you to get out there and vote for them?
So I'm beginning to be quite Eurosceptic, so that's something that I'd like to hear, or at least to defend a bit more our national interest and to defend our borders for sure. And then concentrate on investments on the labor market and innovation and technology, and that is a mix that I couldn't find in all of the parties. So
on the immigration issue, I mean, you know, Berlusconi's party had been talking about it, and, you know, the Lega had been talking about deporting perhaps 600,000 illegal migrants. I mean, why wouldn't you vote Lega?
So I don't really agree with their program on the treasury. So they want to modify the pension schemes, and they are really not favorable towards young people, I think, and they don't have a plan to actually improve the labor market and to have people going to work. You know, one of the big problems is youth unemployment, and I don't see them as really helping with that. So
okay, well,
that is important to me.
Aside from your vote, you know, there is going to be a fundamental change in Italian politics today. Do you think these arguments about the euro, membership of the European Union, and immigration, you know, is today's election the beginning of a Eurosceptic trend, in your opinion?
Well, I guess it depends on the results, of course.
Sure.
The immigration is a central issue on why people are voting one coalition or the other. So I think that's a very big deal. And of course, when we have the results, we will see how much people really cared about that. On the euro, I think at the beginning there were a lot of movements against the euro, like the 5-star movement, the Lega, and even Berlusconi a bit, but now it seems that only Lega is against the euro. So it's a bit weird. And if you see the candidate that Berlusconi is proposing for the government is Antonio Tajani, which is president of
I know him.
Something in Europe. I don't know.
European Parliament,
useless groups, And so, so it's a bit weird because, of course, you have a coalition and you have a person that...
They've slightly backed away, David. They've slightly backed away, apart from the Lega, from their Euroscepticism as this election's approached and as personalities and other things have dominated. David, thank you for your call there from Canterbury, an Italian who couldn't find a party to vote for, but he himself becoming more Eurosceptic. And I suspect there's a lot of people in Italy on that journey. I think so, anyway. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. Euroscepticism is completely reshaping German politics, and it's going to have a bit of a voice today in the Italian elections too. Maybe not quite as strong as I thought it was going to be, but it'll be there today. Of that, there's no doubt. And the other place where Euroscepticism has swept is from an Obama administration. Do you remember that guy? He was the president who came in and said that if we left the European Union, we'd be at the back of the queue, and we didn't like it very much. Well, the new incumbent is a Eurosceptic. He's Donald J. Trump. And on Friday, the European Union was talking about perhaps increasing tariffs on bourbon whiskey, Harley-Davidson motorbikes, and jeans. And a furious Donald Trump has responded, on Twitter, of course, by saying if the EU wants to further increase their already massive tariffs and barriers on US companies doing business there, we will simply apply a tax on their cars which freely pour into the US. They make it impossible for our cars and more to sell there. Big trade imbalance! Exclamation mark. Well, certainly the issue of German cars being sold in America, in the numbers they are, and with such a massive deficit, is something he's talked about many times before. I know one thing he's keen to do is to get German car companies to open plants in the States. Either way, be in no doubt about one thing. The European Union hate the Trump administration, will do anything they can publicly to damage it, and be sure, from the contacts I've got in Washington, that much of that will be reciprocated. Right, back to Euroscepticism in Europe. Nick is a first-time caller from Solihull. Good morning, Nick.
Hello, Nigel. I've been fighting your corner for 20 years.
20 years? Well, Nick, there weren't many of us about 20 years ago, were there?
Well, I started off with Goldsmith when he started the party off. Anyway, I was interviewed by The Guardian the day after the referendum, and because I got great big massive posters outside my house, and
how big, Nick?
Oh, they were the biggest you could get, 6 foot square. I had 2 of them, plus the flags.
So do the neighbours just all think you're a nutter, basically? Or?
No, actually, I mean, that was one of the questions the Guardian reporter said to me. I said, no, I've had an excellent response. My neighbours are actually much in favour of what you're doing. So I actually said to the Guardian reporter that I promised that there would be a domino effect. I've actually got the paper itself, which they printed, because of the way the EU has basically deserted Italy and Greece, and the countries now have become very, very Eurosceptic because of due to mass migration from North Africa into Europe, which we don't hear from the national press, is like the Mirror and the Guardian, that George Soros is funding open society to the tune of 18 billion. That's because he supports open borders, which effectively means that he wants Europe to become one of federal state, and this is just the sort of the footing of what Mr. Soros wants to do. And I believe you were writing to several ministers in the European Union to ask their meetings with him.
Yeah, no, Soros said, Soros's organisation listed 246 MEPs as friends of theirs. So I wrote to them all, asking a series of questions such as, have you had meetings with Soros organisations? Have you taken money from Soros organisations? Have you spoken at conferences from Soros-funded organisations? And guess how many answers I got from them, Nick? Absolutely zippity-doo, but hey, we found the article, by the way. You're Nick Courtney, aren't you?
Yes, I am, yes.
Yeah, we found the Guardian article, and you were drinking champagne, apparently, that morning.
Yes.
Yeah, well, quite right, too. So where does, I mean, is your prediction of a domino effect, doesn't that perhaps explain why Monsieur Barnier is being so tough with us?
Of course, yeah, because they're employing bullying tactics. Basically, they're holding us to ransom. They are absolutely. They do not want to give up these wonderful pensions they've got and these wonderful salaries, first-class travel, etc., because they are threatened by the Brexit vote and also the influence of Mr. Trump, who. Probably at open war with the European Union the way it's going on.
Oh yeah.
But. I think the younger generation are really turned off now by the bullying of the EU, their tactics, and why Mr. Barnier, an unelected, another one like Tusk and like Juncker, none of them have been elected, Nigel, and I think the younger generation need really to take a bit of a history lesson as to why 17.4 million people voted to get out.
Yeah, and so, Nick, your feeling is that this Eurosceptic wave is going to continue across Europe?
I absolutely do, 100%.
Yeah, super. Nick, thank you for calling. Great to take Nick's call there, and I'm seeing this Guardian article the day after the referendum when they sought him out because his house was festooned in Leave posters, and there he was drinking his French champagne. Quite right, too. Will is calling from Oxford. Good morning, Will.
Hi, Nigel. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. So, what do you think?
So you often make the point that there is this wave of Euroscepticism, particularly among people in my generation, the younger generation.
Across Europe, more than this country, yes.
Yeah, no, across Europe, absolutely true. And I think that's true. But isn't that kind of a reason to stay? Because it actually means that your line that we're on a single path to the United States of Europe might not be so correct, because if younger people around Europe are kind of sceptical of grand visions about integration and are realistic and pragmatic about it, doesn't that mean that our country, Britain, who's been the chief flag bearer for pragmatism in Europe across the last 2 decades, might actually be the one forging the consensus over the next 2 decades?
No, I understand. No, listen, it's a very well-made point. However, Will, to change the European Union is dashed difficult. Do you know, we can't even change the fact that once a month our offices get loaded in trucks, put on lorries, and taken 400 kilometres down the motorways of Europe to Strasbourg. And people say, let's reform it. let's get rid of this terrible waste. It's costing another 300 million euros every year, let alone what our carbon footprint may be. And the answer is that to reform it, you would need a unanimous vote in the Council of Ministers, and the French would never, ever vote for that. So, Will, I'm optimistic that we are seeing this youth wave of Euroscepticism in Italy and elsewhere, but I think our futures together in a new, different kind of Europe, once the European Union has gone, a cooperative Europe, that I think is the future of it, Will. And I think, frankly, to stay in the EU, because we're pleased to see the growth of youth wings voting Eurosceptic, would be taking optimism, Will, in my view, a little too far.
You've been an eternal optimist for 20 years, but I think...
True. True. You got me there.
The important point is that, you have to fight for what you believe in, and you can't just walk away from a table when actually the signs are that we might finally be able to achieve some of the things that this country's been arguing for over decades.
I do not believe the European Union can be reformed, will be reformed, and the lesson they've learnt from Brexit is to integrate even more deeply, which I think is leading to even further alienation. There is big change taking place across Europe. We'll see what these Italian results are today. We'll see what coalition government gets formed.